Hello and welcome to video number 5 of my series on reading music for leisure time choir singers. In this video we will be revisiting how time is represented in musical notation by looking at rhythm, particularly looking at simple time and compound time and how music can move between the two. And we will begin looking at the rather intimidating world of syncopation. So let's get started. So what is rhythm? And how do we differentiate that from the beat or the pulse? Well, one way of looking at it is to think of the rhythm as a combination of accented and unaccented beats. So we have certain notes that are stronger sounding than others, and this creates a hierarchy. As this dictionary definition tells us, rhythm may be defined in a way in which one or more unaccented beats are grouped in relation to an accented one. A rhythmic group can be apprehended only when its elements are distinguished from one another. Rhythm always involves an interrelationship between a single accented strong beat and either one or two unaccented weak beats. So whilst the beat or pulse explored in video 1 of this series is a regular consistent division of time, a rhythm changes in either accent or the amount of time between each division, or most likely both. So at its most basic, take 4/4 time. It contains 4 beats. Now if we fill this bar with 4 crotchet notes, the rhythm is created by the distinction between the strong and the weak beats of the bar. Remember this one thing, the first beat of each bar is always the strongest. It's called the downbeat, and it's where we feel the music arrives. Each bar is leading us to the next downbeat. Sometimes the music might use a rhythm that deliberately denies us the satisfaction of a nice solid land on a downbeat for a time. But this always leads to a build of tension, which makes the moment we land squarely on a downbeat all the more satisfying. More on that later. So let's explore some rhythms in simple time. So here we have just 4 crotchet beats in a bar, 4/4 time. This very simply would go 1, 2, 3, 4. But because we're creating a rhythm here, we're not just going to count the beats plainly. We're going to put an accent on the first one. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we've created a rhythm. So we can subdivide each of these beats into 2. So if we subdivide the 4th beat, we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 and. So I tend to just say the word and when I mean the half beat, but you can probably come up with your own system for that. I find this one quite effective. 1, 2, 3, 4 and. We're fitting an extra note in there on the half beat of beat 4 of this bar. Let's take that further and subdivide again. So we've now subdivided the 2nd beat of the bars, making sure we accent the first beat. That will go like this: 1, 2 and 3, 4 and. And so you can imagine if we repeated this rhythm a few times, it would create quite a good musical effect. 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and. And now we're creating a rhythmic pattern or rhythmic group. Let's try and subdivide even further. So here we've also subdivided the 3rd beat of the bar. So now we've got 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. Lots of 8th notes in there, lots of half beat notes. But we've still got the basic pulse. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just on some of the beats of the bar, we're now adding extra notes on the halfway point. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. And finally, let's just take that to its conclusion. We've subdivided every beat in this bar. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now what we can do is subdivide those subdivisions. And that's what's going on here. In the 2nd beat of this bar, not only have we got a note on the half beat, but on the 2nd half of that, we've got a note on the quarter. So 1, 2, and 3, 4. That's what we've got there. 1, 2, and 3, 4. Let's try that again. We're going to subdivide notes on the 3rd beat. So once again, not only we've got the half, 3, and, but also a quarter stuck in there as well. And you see that's represented by the extra beam above the notes. When the quarter notes appear, we've got 2 beams. If you remember back to the first video, as I said, the more complicated, the more stuff gets added to the note, the quicker it goes. So this would sound 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Let's add a few more 16th notes to this mix. So we're now splitting that 4th beat into quarters. We've got our basic pulse, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now add all the subdivisions of that. 1, 2, and E3, and E4, E and E. As you see, the more complex the note gets, the faster it goes. We've got to keep that pulse the same, but add the quarter beat notes in as well. I'll do that once more. 1, 2, and E3, and E4, E and E. I'll just clap it now. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now let's explore some rhythms in compound time. This is any time signature that allows us by default to subdivide each beat into 3, as opposed to simple time, which we could only divide into 2. In each of these examples, the beat is represented by a dotted crotchet, which can be evenly split up into 3 quavers. From then on, each quaver is divided normally into 2, and so on. So in this example here, 12/8, we have 4 beats in each bar. Each beat is represented by a dotted crotchet. So now in this example, we've subdivided the third beat of the bar into 3 quavers. So this would sound like 1, 2, 3, 4. We've subdivided that third beat of the bar into 3 quavers, which we can now because we're in compound time. In this example, we've subdivided the second and third beat. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We've subdivided the second and third beat into its constituent 3 quaver. And so we could continue this until we've divided every beat into 3, and what we would end up with is 12 eighth notes, 12 quavers in the bar, and that's where the time signature comes from, 12/8, 12 eighth notes, and each of those eighth notes is grouped in 3s to make each beat. We can then subdivide further. So in this example here, in the third beat of the bar, the first quaver of that third beat has now been split into 2 semiquavers. Let me just explain that the other way. The first eighth note of the third beat has been divided into 2 16th notes. So now this rhythm would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hear the quicker notes in the middle there? Let's just try that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's look into how written musical notation represents music slipping from simple to compound time, which happens quite a bit, and we can have quite a nice effect when we have simple and compound time happening at the same time. So first, let's see how we can have a bit of compound time in an otherwise simple time phrase of music. To do this, musical notation uses these triplets. So this triplet tells us, as the performer, that we should perform 3 notes in the amount of time where there would normally be 2. So normally we can subdivide each beat in this piece of 4/4 music in simple time into 2. But because of the triplet, for that one beat, we can divide it into 3. This principle can apply to every kind of subdivision. For instance, here we have a sextuplet. This 6-note group will be sounded in the same amount of time we would normally sound 4. And so we can reverse the whole thing. Take this example, which is in compound time, 12/8. So this would be 4 beats in the bar. Each beat would be represented by a dotted crotchet. We would normally be able to split those dotted crotchets into 3 eighth notes or 3 quavers, and so that would create a subdivision of 3. But for this example, in beat 3, we've subdivided it into two halves. And to do that, we needed to write the 2 above the 2 notes to indicate to the performer, perform these 2 notes in the time it would normally take to perform 3. And so I suppose the logical question is why? What's the point? Why have compound and simple time if you can make one from the other? And whilst it's true, yes, you could write out a piece of music in simple time and add triplets to everything and it would sound in compound time. This would work, but it would also get a bit untidy. And whilst it's difficult to get your head around some of these rules initially, in the long run, they tend to be the most efficient way of writing these things down. So yeah, simple time and compound time. They coexist, they sometimes cross over. So here's another rhythmic device. This is called syncopation, the bane of choral singers. This is where we place emphasis in between the beats. It's a good musical device for making some really interesting rhythms, but to perform we need a certain degree of imagination. Let's look at this phrase. The first note doesn't actually land on any beat. So as a performer, we have to imagine where that half beat's going to lie. We might be tempted to perform this, or even this. But as we can see, the note needs to land exactly halfway between the first and the second beat. So let's compare these three. Here's it correctly, so I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, syncopation. And then we've got this version where we've placed the first note a little bit too late on the second beat. So this would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, syncopation. So how do we know this first note should land halfway between the first and the second beat? Well, the first clue is the rest at the beginning. That is a half beat rest. That means anything that follows that must land a half a beat later. And then we have a tied note. Now this way of writing out the music really nice and clearly should show us where the beats land. Here's beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4 is just the rest at the end. But this could also be written like this. So this example would sound exactly the same. We've got a half beat rest at the beginning of the bar that would place the first note on the half beat. But now it's written as a full crotchet. This full crotchet crosses the second beat, so it's a little less clear where the second beat lies. So if you ever struggle with syncopation, this will be my top tip for working it out. In this instance, if we count the beats 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got to place the first note, sing, on the half beat. 1, syncopation. That's not necessarily really easy to do. What about if we counted each eighth note, each half beat? Syncopation. Suddenly, now we're placing notes on subdivisions of the beat. So that would be my top tip. If you've got some syncopation, count a smaller subdivision until you find you're placing notes on actual beats, or subdivisions at least. Well, I do hope you found this video useful. As we get into a bit more detail, things get a bit more dense. So if you do struggle with anything, it might be worth watching back from the first video. As always, if you enjoyed it, please do feel free to share it with anyone you think this might be useful. And there's a full playlist located at the end of this video where you can watch all the videos from the beginning. Please do leave a like if you've enjoyed it and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thank you very much.